Item 10.04 is just a discussion item on culture and diversity. At the October 3rd planning meeting, the full board and administration discussed and agreed upon certain items that we were looking for. One being the Cultural and Diversity Leadership Council title, and looking at the purpose as a sounding board. They're not going to be the decision-making party, and a diverse group of stakeholders will participate with the group, with the Leadership Council, and we encouraged administrators to address students by de-escalating or describing the desired culture for our schools and students, and understanding that we embrace culture and diversity and inclusion, and just reinforce the behaviors and languages that are acceptable, and basically looking at the Rams way throughout the organization. In addition, and I know we talked about the training for the board and SLT. Dr. Miller and I did have a brief conversation with one potential candidate to do that training. I have not yet seen a proposal at this point. I don't know if it got forwarded to Dr. Miller yet, but we're waiting. For a proposal. Yeah. And what we'll do at that time was, once we have that, we'll look at various dates. We did communicate to the individual that it wouldn't be during the normal work day. It would be kind of one of our normal workshop, maybe a 5 o'clock start. Well, again, we'll look at that, but once we get that back and we kind of digest some of that, then we'll come back to the full board and make sure everyone's timing's okay and things like that. So,
yeah, just to add to what Mr. Tertullio said there, the 4 items listed are what we discussed at the last meeting, October 3rd, and came to an agreement on the work. But now we want to move forward and do that. So later this week, we have planned with our core team, plus Dr. Miller, plus the 4 board members that are a part of that group, is to get together and talk about the council, and the makeup of the council, and really thinking about diverse perspectives of the people that would be part of that. That number 50 is important to us. We said, 50 or less as part of that. We have a lot of different people that we're trying to get their perspectives from, so narrowing that down may be a little bit of a challenge, but that's the work that we have ahead of us. We're going to be working with our building administrators as well, and talking about, what is the language that they're going to use with their students, and talking about the things that Greg was mentioning around culture and expectations and what's acceptable and what's not, and reinforcing that in a really healthy, developmentally appropriate way. So we'll be discussing that. And then, we want to continue the work with the council. So the group that meets later this week will be discussing things like, what agenda items would be appropriate for the council. And again, as mentioned here, the council is a sounding board, so we'll go into those meetings with planned items of how we move this organization forward, and then listen for their feedback based upon the discussions we have with our core team, plus our board team, plus our expanded team. So again, a lot of voices to try to help us make appropriate steps as we go forward. So more work coming this week, and we'll continue to provide updates every time we're together as a full board too.
We did talk about one other thing that's not captured, and that is the idea of policy and where it should derive from where it should derive, and we agreed it should be the board. Just wanted, for the record, we did talk about that. It should not come from the council. It should come from the board. Dr. Miller, I think he also said something like, if you want my opinion, if we should have a policy, I'll give it to you some other time. So if that other time, if it's appropriate now, I would like to know what you think about, do we need a policy or not? If now's not the right time, we can table it. But I think you said something like that.
I said that probably around several different topics, that being one of them. So I would first open up to the board, because I think this is a board discussion first and foremost. If you're looking to my recommendation, I would love to give it to you. I don't want my recommendations to get in the way of what needs to be healthy dialogue between and among the board members first.
Okay.
And then maybe I'll come in at the end of that.
Okay. That's fair. Yeah, that's fair. So I wanted to at least, if we wanted to further this conversation a bit tonight, we could talk about that as a board. So
On what a policy would look like, or if we
Or
want
if we need a policy or
If
not.
if we need one or not, we can start there. Yeah.
I mean,
I like Dr. Miller, I'll kind of hold my opinion until later on. Yeah.
Go ahead.
you want to,
Oh.
go ahead.
Okay.
I'll go next.
So do we need a policy? I would say no at this point, but we haven't had discussions yet about, who we're talking to or the direction that we're heading in. So initially, I say, no, we don't need a policy, but if we do decide that we do need one, I agree that it needs to come from the board.
Okay, thank you.
What I would say is, it's not long ago that we ended up getting national attention in ways that we don't like. And it was clear in the wake of that, there were many community members that were here that were asking for a policy so that we don't end up in that place. So I think we need to listen to that. And I think that we as board members need to pay attention to what community members are asking for. And I think that was pretty clear that that was what was being asked for. So, I would say that we should follow through on that and have some pretty robust discussion about what that might look like.
Thank you, Matt.
I would echo what Matt is saying. I only don't think that recent national news and the board that night, but earlier things in our school district have also put into that the fact that there's an anti-racism coalition, a group of parents in our school district that are concerned, and he speaks to the need of a policy. I think if we say that we don't have any information or data, I think that's very misleading. I think we have a lot. And on top of that, I think we need to remember that throughout history, people had to take steps to make sure the voices of the minority are protected and heard. The civil rights movement, women's voting rights. If left to the majority of people, a lot of that might not have happened. I'll repeat that. If left to the majority of the people, and brave people didn't take steps to make policies, things may not have changed or taken a lot longer to change. I hope this board can be brave and take the steps needed to make sure our students, our minority students, are protected and taken care of.
Thank you, Carla.
And if I could just say a little bit more, as part of past discussions, one thing that came out that was pretty clear was that having policies that only are set up to punish something once a transgression occurs is insufficient for what this district needs going forward. That we need something that is like the analogy or lights on a runway that helps our community move forward in ways so that everyone who's part of our community feels like they're part and valued as being part of the community. We have issues with race in the community. That's been clear from things that we've observed and seen directly, and from what people who are African American members of the community, people of color, say they need help. They need a policy so that we get put on track. And so I think that's something we need to pay attention to as board members very seriously.
I kind of agree what Mrs. Hillman said about, I don't know if we necessarily need a policy now. Let's see where we go when this council works through things a little bit more. I don't know. Some of the things I feel like we can address as a district can be in the Rams way. It can be discussions about, about race and about appropriate language and what you do not say and those kind of discussions. And I think that supports everybody in our district. And I don't know if we need a policy for that. But we'll see if we get there. But, you know, I mean, those are the things that I feel like are, you know, the first thing that needs to be done. And I know a lot of that is done in Rams Way, but, you know, we can certainly bolster that and get that message to everybody a little, you know, louder and clearer, and then see where we are from there.
Thank you, Andy.
Yeah, just to follow up on that, so what do you say to the people who've asked for us to make a policy? You know, it doesn't work for everybody. The way you frame that, it's like, well, it will work for everybody. But clearly there are people who have said, we need a policy. So what's the answer to that?
What I just said was, I don't think we need one right now, but let's see how this council progresses. I don't know if all of the things, if we want to go back and look at 832 and all of the parts and, you know, pieces of that, if that solved all of the issues, if that would have, you know, stopped certain things, I don't know. I don't think it would have, and that's why I didn't vote for it. But, you know, let's see where we end up.
Well, I mean, those folks have said that they need a policy soon, like right away. Like, this isn't something, I'm not saying that something needs to be rushed, but it's clear there's a need that needs to be addressed here. So that, to me, that elevates a certain sense of urgency, because I hear what people in the community are saying. So putting it off too far, to me, feels like not listening to what people are asking for. So I just want to point that out, to make sure that we're kind of upfront with an approach to this.
And I think we need to be careful, because it could be perceived that because it doesn't affect our children, and that our children benefit from what's already in place, that we're saying we don't need a policy, where other parents who differ from us, who have children with different experiences, have clearly asked for a policy. So we need to remember this is about all children. And I'll say it again, parents of Black and brown children, parents of LGBTQIA children, have been pretty clear with their direction. And I say it again, I hope this board is brave enough to look to the minority.
Would anyone else like to weigh in?
Well, my knee-jerk reaction at the time was that, you know, when we did 832, was that a policy was a good idea, and it was how do we structure that policy. So at this point, I'm still leaning towards that. I just don't know exactly what it's going to look like at this point, right?
But the concept of
Language-wise,
having a policy.
the concept of having a policy, to me, because of, and I've stated this publicly, because of the way 103 is, and I think something that would help neaten some of that up, because there's a lot in 103, right? It's a little busy, if you will, to neaten up some of those points that talk directly about diversity and inclusion. Those things, to me, make sense, right? Exactly how that's structured, I can't say yet. This training may be part of, you know, getting everyone on the same, you know, baseline board of that, and then where we can move forward from. That's just my, now, if we end up not having a policy, I'm not saying that I'm necessarily opposed to that. I'm just saying my idea from the beginning has been some sort of a policy felt right to me.
Okay. Thank you, Greg.
I'd
Would,
share,
Do you really want to go last?
Well,
Because you still got two more. Yeah. You have a few more board members. Christina, would you like to weigh in?
I think I'm with Amy. I feel like those conversations need to happen in the council, and you know, we'll go from there, see what comes out of it.
Okay. Thank you. Joe?
I did have one thought I'd like to share,
Oh.
if that's okay.
Sure.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Sorry, Joe.
I'm just in agreement. I think the decision on whether we have a policy or not a policy right now is too quick. We need to listen to what the committee has to comes back to us with, and then from there we would make the decision what their recommendations are.
Okay.
So this isn't meant to persuade, but it's just like the reality of our lives. why policies are helpful. I'll use an example. We didn't have a policy on, a booster policy years ago. And as a result, we had a lot of different people doing a lot of different things for the good of kids, but it was tough to manage that from a building administrator, central office role. We built, with the board members, a policy that now provides a lot of guidance and support for all these organizations that refer to it, and that's helpful to have. So having a policy around culture, diversity, it does help a building level administrator, a teacher understand, like, number one, we value this, so there's a clear understanding of what the board has to say about whatever that topic is. And it also provides some of those guidelines and boundaries on what's good for us to move on with confidence, because without it, we're a little bit walking on eggshells of what we can or can't, should or should not. So that's where that guidance and understanding coming from the board and leading toward us and to teachers is really helpful.
Well, thank you, Mike. And so we're going to keep you for last. Yeah.
If you want to go last, if I could just insert something there.
Sure.
Before that. So I just want to point out the fact that, earlier this year, there are board members here that were really critical of the concept of these committees, weighing in with their expertise, particularly around health-related issues and masking issues and pandemic issues. And the tenor of that debate was, let's not rely on these committees. In fact, there was a lot of suspicion cast about the committees themselves. And so the debate was, have it in the board, right? Now it seems like there's a complete inversion here where some of the same board members are saying that debate should only be happening in the committee first. So I just want to point that out. Now, I happen to think that the committees are valuable. I've been consistent throughout that input is valuable, and it should happen at the board level. So I think that I just wanted to point those things out. It's a little bit curious, I think.
Well, I'm going to jump in here because I don't think my position has changed on these committees. I think what should not happen in those committees, and I think I'm hearing agreement, maybe not from a couple members, but maybe the majority, that policy should not be made in those. What I'm willing to have is discussions and conversations and information gathering that come out of those committees that we can bring back, much like like the strategic planning process. I've really appreciated how that's moved forward, that we hear and then we talk about those issues here and decide how we want to address them, whether that's by policy, whether that's by taking a look at the discipline code, maybe it's some other mechanism that we haven't discussed yet, maybe it's going back to previous things that were discussed during the equity policy debate that we didn't have a chance to dive into because of some of the controversies there. So I think that it should be a way to help inform how we move forward with this process and the direction that we take as far as whether or not we make policy, we address things in different ways. I don't think my position has changed because policy should not be created in those committees. Otherwise, we should be making them open to the public just like our meetings.
Just for a point of clarification, I don't think anybody on this board suggested that the policy should be made in the council. And I don't appreciate a statement that alludes to that.
Well, hearing community member after community member, now mind you, much of this predates me. I was not on the board during the formulation of that policy. Yeah. But community member after community member came forward and said that they worked on that policy in that committee. And so that's what I'm hearing is that's the kind of work that may have happened there.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement right now
so-
that it's going to be made if there is a policy, it will be made at the board level.
So one of the tricks of having a conversation is to let go of the past, to move forward. There's absolutely no way to move forward if we can't let go of the past. So the way we're going right now, it won't be helpful. So let's just stop it, right? It's not helpful. What will be helpful is understanding where everyone thinks about, do we need a policy or not? And that's why I'm glad we're able to do this. So just thank you all for being vulnerable, sharing what, you take a risk when you share what you're thinking, and part of the risk is what we just experienced. So it is what it is. Let's just stop if we can. Can I go?
Yeah.
All right. So no one thing we can do or will do will correct the situation. This element of our culture that a lot of us don't like. Most of us, if not all of us, don't like. So,
I'm sorry, is that racism and discrimination against?
yeah, exactly.
Okay,
Yeah,
just want to
exactly.
make sure we're clear
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
No one likes
Okay.
that. No one accepts that. No one wants that, right? So that's exactly right, Matt. So, but there's also no one thing that we'll do that's a silver bullet to eliminate that. We won't have utopia. We can only do as many things as we can possibly do to help change the situation for the better. In my opinion, a policy is one of the tools that will help us do that. So I think we're better positioned to affect the change we want with a policy for a lot of the reasons that we heard, in addition to the other things that we're talking about. So personally, I think that I would welcome a conversation about a policy. I think it should start with us. I think, it's essentially, think of the legislative body. That's where laws start. That's where policies start. It should start with us. I think we should start with a clean sheet of paper. If we agree that ultimately that this is what we want, we write it. And we can decide how we're going to do that. But so that's what I think about. I think we should what form, what shape, the language, that will be determined by us. But I think that vehicle to help us accomplish what we want is necessary. Dr. Miller, thanks for your patience.
Yeah. So, first, I think this has been a pretty good conversation. We've had input from everybody. That's a huge positive. So I'm appreciative of that, and I want to share that. Without getting so the best organizations learn. They're learning. And as an education organization, it would be awesome if we lead the charge on being a learning organization, because it literally is our mission. And part of learning was the willingness of the board to commit to, with the SLT, to some training and time spent in discussing topics. So I think that as a learning organization, that should happen first. We will be different, I think, when we spend more time together talking, listening to each other, understanding, asking questions. And so we let that happen. I think that's an important step in the process. I believe that policy in this area, which is important and should happen, because Mike didn't use the word alignment, but when he was talking, what I was thinking about was alignment. There are certain topics and areas where having a policy that aligns with practice, which then connects to buildings, which then moves into classrooms, which then impacts individual students, that alignment provides the kind of consistency and clarity that is so important to success. And I believe that in this area, at the right time, with the right learning happening, that will be the best. And again, what that will mean is that for all the differences that exist, race is an example of a difference, and gender is an example of a difference. Sexual orientation is an example of a difference. A family who's disadvantaged economically, it has an impact and it makes a difference. And so when we can work together in a proactive way to set direction and provide alignment and clarity around how do we strengthen this place so that all students feel like they belong and are connected to people and to their learning and prepared for the future, I think that's a good thing. So I believe also it's an important tool, but it's an important tool at the right time. With respect to the council, I don't want to send a mixed message. And so for a leadership council, policy has not ever been regardless of the words people use, policy or the decision to do or not do policy doesn't come from councils, it comes from the board. And that should continue to be something that always comes from the board. It's a major responsibility. So I think being very clear, and we have, again, that's learning. So we'll have a meeting later this week with the representatives on that group. We'll be talking about that stuff. But being real clear about purpose and non-purpose of a council is important. If it's one thing to bounce ideas off a representative group, it's another thing to send a message that the group has a voice greater than they do. So it has to be fair and honest from the get-go, so that the group, we want people to participate, to be open, and continue, right? And one of the ways people don't continue is if they feel like their voice really isn't being heard. So we have to be real careful about when we're asking for feedback and what the scope of responsibility is from the participants of that. So again, so thank you.
Okay, no, thank you. Well, I'm glad we can talk about that. I wanted to move it a little bit, 1% forward tonight, and I think we did, so thank you.
So if I can just comment, my intentions are always to try to move things forward. I think the way to do that legitimately is also to reflect on what has happened in the past and learn from it. So I think a categorical characterization of looking at what has happened in the past as somehow is not productive, I don't agree with that. I think we have to look at what has happened in the past and learn from it. If we approach the past from the perspective of, help me understand what's different now than what was before, and be open to have a conversation about that, I think that's healthy. I think that's a healthy way to go. Not to relitigate things that have happened in the past. That's not the intention. So I just wanted to clarify that.
Yeah, I know
so-
where your heart is,
yeah,
Matt. You want to
right.
be, I got
That's
you.
right. So I just wanted to be clear
But
about that.
it's like a little tripwire.
Oh, it is.
There's a
It's
tripwire
delicate,
there.
right?
Yeah.
But the past is, right?
Yeah.
The past
Right.
is tricky.
Right.
But healthy cultures are open to looking at those things, even if it's uncomfortable. So that I think is an important thing just to bring forward. And that's really my only point. It's not to rehash things, but I think that is I want to try to be helpful so that there's not this notion of, well, we can't talk about what's happened in the past.
I hear you. Thank you, guys.
All right.
Can I circle back to just a little more information about the training, like the timeline? I know it's hard to identify someone.
We've identified a person, we've asked for a proposal. So as soon as we receive that, we'll be able to talk about it. The ball's not in our court right this second.
Okay.
But as soon as we get the information, we'll be sharing it with the full board.
And I'm sorry, but like, how do we go through the process of identifying a person?
How did we do it?
Yeah.
I asked the board, the entire board, if you had any suggestions of people that you thought maybe we could reach out and contact. We used some of our other regional partners to ask for suggestions.
Okay.
A person was identified, someone who we did not know, that we thought might be a really good person to understand where we are and the learning spot that we're in. We talked about that. We reached out, had a call with that person, and talked about where have we been, where are we now, or what are we thinking about in terms of a professional development. That person seemed interested and was going to put a proposal together. So
Okay.
as soon as we get the background, I feel super confident if it works out.
Okay.
That's exactly the type of person we're looking for. We just, until we have it in hand, I don't want to do a disservice to that individual
I just wanted to
or
make it
anybody else.
transparent
Yep.
to the community.
Thank you.